Hey everyone. So, yes, woo! This is my first DevOps day. Great. So, you may find yourself at a beautiful conference with a beautiful crowd, and you may ask yourself, well, how did we get here? So, I'm Angela Runge, going to be talking about how you look to the past to transform the future of IT and DevOps. So, going to be talking a lot about the history of computers leading up to cloud computing, but also talk a little bit about buildings and how cities transform, and you guessed it, talking heads. So to kick things off, you might be asking me, well, how did I get here? So I'm a millennial and a digital native, a little bit of a baby. So computers have always been a part of my life, especially since both of my parents were in tech, right? So some of my earliest memories were drawing with MS Paint. This is an Angela Runge original. And also I played Doom as like a 4-year-old. So, so computers have always been there, but I didn't want to go into computer science like my parents. So instead I went into industrial design and I got a fine arts degree. This is me. In industrial design, you're building like physical prototypes for different products. But like so much for that, I ended up going to work at IBM, not really knowing what it is. I went in as a UX designer, and it just so happens IBM is the oldest computer company out there. And so I started at IBM Cloud just a year after it launched. So for the last 10 years, I've been started off as UX designer, but then I moved into user research. And what I do as a user researcher is talk to a bunch of folks like you, understand what are your jobs, and also get to listen to a bunch of complaints to make our products better and try to convince my teams to make cloud work for y'all. And so the one thing I've learned from all these conversations with folks is cloud is a black box. Literally, it's a bunch of servers in a data center. But the thing is, what's actually going on inside these black boxes? And so I'm sure all of you can relate. Cloud is very abstract, it's virtual, it's hard to grasp. And the thing that really helped me understand and kind of make it tangible about what is cloud, oddly enough, was this movie called True Stories. And so this film's from 1986, and it's directed by David Byrne, who's the lead singer of Talking Heads, features a bunch of their songs. And so in the movie, David Byrne, he actually plays an interviewer who's going down to go to a little town in Texas. He's going to interview a bunch of citizens as they are preparing for a celebration for the 100th and 50th anniversary of Texas's independence. And in this film, you get to meet a bunch of quirky characters, including this technician who's played by John Goodman. And so he and a bunch of the other citizens in this town, they work at this company called Vericore. And so Vericore, their computer manufacturing plant. And what was really uncanny was the fact that this fictional company, Vericore, was a lot like what the domain was before it was the domain, when it was actually the original campus for IBM and their office park, as well as their manufacturing for silicon chips and also Selectric typewriters. And so it was built in 1967 up in North Austin before it became the shopping center and apartments we all love. And what was so helped me see with this film was by having those pictures, like seeing the manufacturing plants, seeing the PCs being built. It was really helpful because it helped me give a picture in my head of what was the past of IBM, what was actually the past of the tech industry in Austin, here where we live. So these are actual photos from the Austin American-Statesman of the original IBM location, and it looks like it was literally pulled out from this movie, right? And so it took this satire, which is actually making fun of my job, making fun of the place that I live, to make me ask myself, well, how did cloud get here? And I think many of you all here know the answer is the mainframe. And if any of you attended Jeremy's talk yesterday or have your own experience with bare metal, you might picture this when you think of a mainframe. Or maybe from a movie or a TV show, maybe picture something like this, right? The original computers for business looked a lot like this, which is more like a piece of furniture than a machine, right? And so this was the tabulator, and it was invented by Herman Hollerith back in the 1890s. Like, that's a long time ago. And so these tabulators, so it eventually got acquired by IBM in 1911, before IBM was even called IBM. And how these worked is you have this stylus to punch in these holes with these little note cards. And so that's how you're actually representing the data, is through those holes. So this here on the left is a picture of one of the original punch cards for the 1890 US Census, right? So you punch a hole to be like, okay, here's this person's profession. Here's where there's 4. Also, what are like all of their health conditions? There's like diarrhea on that. But over time, the punch cards, they became more standardized. To compact even more space, they're using a rectangular hole instead of a circle, right? Because the thing is, with these punch cards, these physical pieces of paper, if you needed more space for your storage, you needed to get a literal bigger building to store it all, right? So it's just nuts to think about. So over time, the tabulators and computers, they become a little bit more modernized. They're using electricity, metal instead of wood. And you're able to like write your program, make your calculations. But the thing is, customers, they want this to be faster, take up less space. They want it to be easier to access the data, right? So that led to the introduction of the magnetic tape reel. And from hearing the conversations today, there's still a number of you folks who are familiar with this form of data storage. And so what was great with the magnetic reels was the fact that one reel could hold the same amount of data as 10,000 of those little punch cards, right? And what also was interesting, like the form of the mainframe started to change. So the fact like it's taking up a room, you can move around it. You have your databases, your input, output, places where you write your programming. And like when you talk about networking, like networking is literally the cables between these machines, right? As someone who's like, I am a cloud native because I just started using with cloud, I'm like, oh my God, these things are real in space. Kind of boggles my mind. So the issue with the magnetic tape, though, you have to advance it and rewind it to get to the data that you want. So it led to this thing, right? So the hard disk storage, where it looks a little bit more like a CD, kind of you're able to access that data wherever it may be. It's a lot easier. You don't have to rewind it and advance it. And we all know this, so like those original disks, they started like the size of like a dinner plate, and then over time get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so what that means is that that mainframe that took up a whole room, now it can fit the size of a refrigerator. You can take it with you in a U-Haul. And not only that, with the dawn of the internet, it means that you don't even need to own the hardware. You can have one of these companies and rent out the servers directly from them in a data center. And what's great about this is the fact like, hey, now you can focus what you care about, your applications, your products, what's gonna bring value to your company. And so looking to the past really helps us like have a better idea of what's going on in these black boxes, right? But it doesn't really tell us about, okay, how are organizations using these things? And along with that, I know there's like in this room so many people who have a lot of great expertise in cloud computing, but I find that sometimes it can be hard to see the forest for the trees. So I'm going to take one quick sip of water before we jump into our next part. Because one thing, just off the side, as you can probably hear, I'm not an engineer, but I am really fascinated by urban planning and architecture and the development of cities, right? And with many of my conversations with folks in IT, I've had a growing suspicion that maybe things are a little more concrete than we give it credit for. Because we talk a lot about architecture, right? We talk a lot about architects and environments and infrastructure all the time. And so these similarities between IT and the built environment really became a lot clearer to me when I started renovating my house in East Austin. And because I started running into these problems, and I'm like, this reminds me a lot of what solution architects tell me about modernizing legacy applications, right? Or cloud-native solutions. And so this is what my house looked, my living room before any updates. And I'm sure all of you can relate to that feeling of picking up a project that someone else started before you, and you're trying to improve upon it. And what you're doing is you're asking, like, why did they make any of these decisions? Like, how did they get here? To the extent that it's like, oh, like, why'd they route the plumbing this way? Like, these windows are so insecure, someone can break inside. And then you start to, as you progress, you uncover more and more bizarre decisions until, for instance, with my home renovation project, my general contractor was literally like, you guys should have gone with a new build, right? You should have started fresh. Maybe something a little bit more like your greenfield development, okay? Start from scratch, and you don't have to worry about picking up the mess of everyone else before you for your brownfield project. So my renovation was definitely a brownfield renovation project, and but luckily, like, even though it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, it was worth it in the end. Things turned out great. Beautiful living room. Just closed on selling it this week. And and I hope many of your modernization projects have also turned out well, as like my home. So this is what I picture when I think of a lift and shift. You're literally like moving your workload over. You have to like hook everything back up again. You're hoping like the migration, like things didn't break apart and fall apart in the process. But wouldn't it be nice if everything was like a little more portable, like your code nicely packaged in your containers, so like it's just plug and play. You just move it when you need to. And so if any of you guys have worked on in an enterprise on modernizing any legacy apps, you've had to maybe replatform something, well, I bet it felt a lot like this. So it takes years and dozens of people to be coordinated to lift those workloads up and replatform that. And this is actually a photo of Chicago when they had to replatform the foundation of their downtown because, oops, they built on a marsh. Like, shouldn't they have thought about that earlier, right? So with all these connections, it helped me see how a large company is really like a city. These things are enormous. They are complex. There are so many people involved in them. But the thing is, every large city, it started off small. It started out as a tiny town, maybe a couple of houses, and it grew over time. And that's the same thing at how your enterprise is coming from IBM. I think about it like, how did I get this big? But as we saw with that history, like every company started out small at some point. And even if you're at a startup today, that is the same potential to transform and grow into something huge, right? And so with transformation, if you think about transforming our organizations, transforming DevOps and IT, I find you can draw a lot of these parallels between the transformation of cities from small towns to it, because it uses the same theme of operating at scale. So I'm going to tell one, as we wrap things up, share one story related to Chicago, because I lived in Austin for 9 years, but about a year ago, I moved to Chicago, so I've been learning a lot about its history, right? And the first thing anyone will tell you about the history of Chicago is the Great Fire of 1871. So what was happening was everyone was building these wood buildings really fast. They were excited. They're growing the city. They were able to grow from 300 people to 300,000 people in the span of 50 years. And that's a lot like what our app devs feel like. They're excited. They're building fast. They're building something new, but they're not necessarily thinking about what's going to go wrong. But disaster strikes. And so what happened in Chicago is a fire broke out, and because they didn't have those building codes, they didn't have those inspections going on, it led to the destruction of 17,000 structures, along with leaving a third of the population unhomed. And so we don't want our apps to crash and burn either when they first get launched. So that's where that same sort of feeling of like, what is the Great Fire of some of our applications? That would be like your server's going down, you get that Sev1 incident, a really bad vulnerability comes up. But the thing is, Chicago, they learned from their mistakes, just like we do from reflecting and the postmortems that we might run. So for Chicago's case, they learned to build with brick. It's more resilient, thicker walls, introducing the governance of some of those building codes. And similarly, that's why we need to introduce those architectural patterns that are secure by default and integrate these best practices from the get-go, because that means we can build more resiliently and avoid those disasters in the future. So that's things like multi availabilities, high availability zones, load balancing, security policies, and all that. And so rebuilding a single house or rebuilding a single app is like one problem, but rebuilding an entire city or maybe like a whole company's infrastructure really is like a whole different problem on its own. But for Chicago in the 1900s, like they were able to build faster, bigger, and stronger using these templates for these 2 flat apartments. And so what was great about these, they had the best practices built into them, but also like having that flexibility for different families to do what they wanted. It's a lot like what we know with our platform engineering, our infrastructure as code templates, and so because each dev team, like they're gonna need to do what's like specific to them, while at the same time have that security and compliance baked in from the get-go. So with this, transforming your company's infrastructure is a lot like transforming a city in the sense that you need to enable those best practices for these independent teams while also giving them the trust that they need, having that flexibility, along with knowing like there is a need for governance, but how can it be done in a way that doesn't create that sense of control and constraint upon people. So as we wrap things up, I'm going to share with you the final quote from the movie True Stories. It really hit home for me. So how it goes is, well, I really enjoyed forgetting. When I first come to a place, I notice all the little details. I notice the way the sky looks, the color of white paper, the way people walk, doorknobs, everything. Then I get used to the place, and I don't notice those things anymore. So only by forgetting can I see the place again as it really is. And I feel, in a sense, cloud computing has made us forget what computers are for, but luckily, we can see them how they really are in a way that's right in front of us. Because when you think of a website, like a site is literally a place for people and businesses to come together. A software tool, a tool is used for how people do their jobs. And even the word application, it's how people apply computers and programs for people, our end users. Because in the end of the day, like this is who we're serving when we do all of our work in DevOps and IT. And so whenever you feel that friction between technology, processes, and people, I hope this metaphor that I've shared with you today on infrastructure and architecture in cities and buildings, I hope it brings reassurance to you that transformation is possible by looking to the past and asking yourself, well, how did we get here? So thank you all so much for listening and giving your attention. If you, as a user researcher, I love to talk to people in IT, so please reach out to me or sign up on this QR code. So thank you so much, everyone.